All right, so we're looking at chapter 2, what are data? And so hopefully you've read through this. If not, you're going to need your book to read through it some as well. I will have it posted digitally for those of you who'd like to read through it digitally. All right, so our impacts of data. So a little quote from your book. Data trumps intuition. Instead of using our intuition, we experiment on the live site and let our customers tell us what works for them. And this is from the director of data mining and personalization for Amazon. So Amazon's a pretty big company, pretty successful, and they use data, and like he says, it trumps intuition. There's no guessing. They look right at the stats and what it tells them. So it is important. So we need to define that. So the question, what are data? So a lot of it you get data tables. You need to first provide the context for those tables. As you can see here, there's an example of a bunch of data, numbers, names, places, a lot of things in there. But we need to define a couple things. So you need to begin to find out the who and the what. Those are important ideas there. The who and the what. Because who and what are all these things kind of makes a difference. So you can start finding that meaning if you organize those values into a data table. This table is on page 8 for you. So you can see at the top is our unorganized data, but then as we organize it, put some labels across the top, now those things start to make sense. We have a purchase order, who bought it, where it was shipped to, the cost, the area code, and so on and so on. So that information makes a big difference. So organizing your data is important as having the data, or more important in some sense, because if you have a lot of data and it's not organized, it don't mean a whole lot to you. All right, so what we're really going to look at is really the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, why, and then eventually, if we can, there's a good how question that might need to get answered as well. So look through those and see what they become. All right, so the who. In general, rows of data are individual cases about who or whom or which, if they're not people, record info in. And then often the cases are a blank selected from some larger blank that we would like to understand. All right, so you guys are going to fill that out. I'll have a question inserted for you. I want you guys to fill that out. Next is this idea of variables. So a fancy name for the what do you want to study? So our what is our variable. So what are some variables that you guys can think of? Okay, so again, we'll have a little discussion post on this. So there's a couple of basic ones I thought up. What are some variables? We have colleges, the number of texts per day, your sports team, schools, type of schools, eyeshadow, artists. Those are all variables. They can change depending on what you're looking at. And there's way more answers than this, and hopefully you saw quite a few of those in the discussion. Next is values, the different options for each variable. So for colleges, you have public, private, religious. Sports team, you have the Lakers, you have the Bulldogs, you have Apaches. Number of texts per day, 0, 1, 2, and more than you want to read, and so on. So you have variables, and then you have the values that go into those variables. All right, so categorical variables, the what and the why. So we're going to be studying 2 types of variables in this course. So I want you guys, through your reading, should have found what those are. So I want you to kind of answer those as well. So you can see here that our categorical variables are categorical and quantitative. So categorical: name, city of birth, type of car, shoe size. Okay, so kind of a description. And quantitative is like the actual numeric value, something you can count: height, number of states you visited, gas mileage, cost per pair of shoe. Okay, and so what is the difference between the two? So instead of talking about this in your groups, I'm going to have you guys have a nice little discussion post on this. All right, so here you can see categorical variables. And so there's several categories that this all goes in. The values of the categorical variable are labels for the different categories. And then distribution of a categorical variable lists the count or percent of the individuals who fall into that category. So you can see up here, we have our variable, which is our format or the count of stations. Then we have our values, which is all of that information there. And then we have our count, which are actual numbers there. And then you can see based off of that, we have percents of those as well. All right, so here's another example. And so I want you to identify as what is the variable or variables, what are the value or values, what's the count, and what is the percent for each of these. All right, so you're going to fill that out in a discussion post. Okay, so kind of seems redundant, but counts count. What you are counting matters, because there's two reasons why you might count something. You might count the number of ways in each category. So shipping method, you have the ground, second day, and overnight, and how many times something happens within that category. You also have the measure of amounts of different things. So how many times one item you've counted. So January, so the number of purchases that happen in January. So maybe not be the same thing, but it's how many of one item you have. All right, so I want you to, again, you'll post what is the difference between the previous of to count the number of ways in a category as opposed to the measure of amounts of different things. Okay, so what is the difference between those two? And then last, to finish up your reading and filling out, where, when, and how. So we must know the who, the what, and the why to analyze the data. But if possible, it is beneficial for us to know the when, the where, and the how. Now, why does that matter? Because the when, if values for your study or data is taken from 1814, well, that's way different than today. It's over 200 years ago. Values could be way different. Where they're measured make a difference. Things that take place in Mexico versus California, even in Sanger versus Clovis, all of those may make a difference in what your data looks like. And then how data is collected is important or nice to know, because is it insight? Is it real data or is it nonsense? Simple example, real data, surveys or polls or scientific experiments of some sort, or is it just a tweet about something that people responded to? Okay, that's not a true survey, because there's some rules about how those things are conducted. So the how matters as well.